Welcome back, listeners, to the guest segment of today's episode. And for those tuning in via video, I am excited about our guest segment today. And as usual, I'm going to hand it over to our guest to introduce herself to us.
Thank you for having me. My name is Arlyn Davich. I'm a human, but I guess in the context of like a human first, but in the context of my career, I guess I'm a serial entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial. Most of my recent stints have been as CEO of either venture-backed or, fast-paced, growth-based consumer businesses. So I started my first company, which was called PayPerks. Then I joined Walmart as an entrepreneur in residence and started a mattress brand called Allswell. Then I led a team at a company called ShopShops, which is a live shopping platform. And now I have doing fractional executive work, both fractional CEO and CMO roles for a portfolio of really awesome, fun clients, ranging from like healthcare to audio, podcast type stuff to beauty. So just leveraging that across, like leveraging my operating experience across a whole bunch of brands right now.
Just human. That's it.
But a human.
I missed the mattress company piece. I don't know how I missed that one. So yeah, that's new to me.
Well, I don't know if you know the company, know Allswell, but Allswell is, so I joined Walmart as an entrepreneur in residence, and they were like, we have all these assets at Walmart, find something that is, inspiring and could really add to the business at Walmart. And so we ended up starting a direct to consumer. It's really a home brand with a hero product of mattresses. I don't work there and I don't get royalties anymore, but honestly, I would highly recommend the mattresses. They're very, very high quality and a very good price for that quality. And we also sell a whole bunch of other home goods from like sheets and bedding and stuff like that. So I came up with a name for it based on an ethos that I think we're going to get into more later. And, built the brand to, pretty successful. So, and then, transitioned it to some new leadership before moving on to my next thing.
Love it. Awesome. Thank you. So you told us also that you're a serial entrepreneur, but if you had to describe the space in which you're having an impact, how would you describe that? What is that space and what does it entail?
Yeah. So I think of myself as an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur is really defined by having more softer qualities than necessarily hard skills, but it is hard skills too. But being able to see things through a different lens, being able to motivate a group of people towards a common end, being able to navigate through ambiguity, being able to set arbitrary goals in the face of ambiguity and lead a group of people towards that end. And that's what I spent my career up until, call it a year ago, doing at a specific company. And so now what I'm doing is I'm taking that skill set and I'm applying it across a portfolio of companies to help other people be more entrepreneurial in the businesses that they lead. So whether it be a high growth startup who maybe hasn't done that before and they need some more older hands on the wheel, someone who's done it before, or it's an older, more mature business who wants to get into the faster part of the stream, I can, deploy the skill set at those types of companies as well.
I love that you started with the fact that it's the soft skills that are the points of distinction for you in the work that you do now. Is that something you always lean into conveying as part of what you do?
Well, I think it's maybe soft skills is the wrong framing for it. But I think when I think of any kind of work, I think of process and I think of content. And if you're starting a business, let's say you're starting I have a tape measure here. So let's say you're starting a tape measure business, right? There's the process of how do you start a business. And then there's the knowledge of the tape measure space. That's the content, right? And so as a fractional exec, the kind of work that I do now, it's very often I'm not going to be the content expert. Yeah. But what I am, because I've done this entrepreneurial journey so many times, is I'm the process expert. And the process is both, I guess there's content in the process, right? So like the softer skills are part of the content in the process part. But what I think that where the where I'm adding a lot of value now is less on the content area and more on the helping people with deep content area expertise adhere to a process that helps accelerate growth.
That. And I'm reacting to so much of what you just said because it's so critical. In that, I actually appreciate the fact that you use the phrase soft skills, because now that I understand what you mean by it too, it's those skills that tie to a proven process of what you said, using a different lens to solve problems or seize opportunities, lead people through ambiguity. And I forgot the third point that you said.
It was whatever it was brilliant, I'm sure.
It was actually quite brilliant. but I love the fact that you boil it down to the process, right? And if we look at it that way, and I'm going to stick with soft skills just for a little bit, then it actually doesn't matter if it's a tape measure or, I'm looking at mangoes, being the best mango picker out there in the world, or the best podcaster, et cetera, et cetera. It's that process that's really the distinction in all these opportunities that you're seizing. And I literally just put words in your mouth. So keep me honest if that makes sense.
Well, no, I mean, going back to the soft skills point, growing up in high school, college, I was never the best student, right? And I knew I was never going to be the best student, but I knew that I had to, to get into college, I had to differentiate in some way. And so something that I did gravitate towards was this fuzzy thing of leadership, right? So I, was the captain of this team and the head of the glee club. And that to me was a more natural kind of a skill set than being able to take a test or something like that. Yeah. And so through those leadership roles, I think I appreciated more how much more there is to leadership and what other soft skills contribute to somebody being a good leader. And having been, all of my jobs really have been CEO or being in that leadership role. And so I think that my soft skills have gotten hardened, if you will, over the career.
I love that. I really appreciate that. So this season, what we're honing in on too is this commitment to masterful execution, which is not about perfection in everything that we do, but about being consistent. And you kind of just shared with us a little bit of my interpretation of formula that you're applying to this fuzzy thing called leadership. So when you think of how you show up consistently, especially as a fractional CEO, as you just described it, what is it that you bring to every situation to show up as the best Arlyn that you can be in that moment?
Yeah, well, I love this point of consistency so much. And it's something that I focus on, not just in my work life, but in my personal life. And actually, the process that I put in place at most of my companies mimics the process that I have in my personal life. And I'll describe it to you at a high level, and you can imagine. I'll describe it in a work context. Actually, I'll describe it in a personal context, and you'll be able to imagine how it gets extrapolated into the work realm.
Awesome.
So every year, I set annual goals, right? Yep. And I set them in lots of different dimensions. So there might be a career realm. If you imagine an Excel spreadsheet, down one column, it might be career or physical health or friendship or, whatever it may be. And then I set annual goals. And then I say every quarter, I say, okay, what are my quarterly goals? And then every week I say, okay, what are my weekly goals? And then every day, I go into that tracker document and I look at my weekly goals and I look at my quarterly goals. Yeah. And since I started doing this process, I have not missed a day. I do it every single morning. And it is like so much for me. It is so grounding. It is the opposite of it, whatever the opposite of anxiety inducing is. It just makes me feel more at peace. Yeah. And I feel like even when I'm busiest, I'm like, I know that what I'm doing today is going to ladder up to what I said I wanted to do this week, this month, this quarter, this year. And so that sort of discipline allows you to be more free, right? And that a similar type of methodology is what I use with my portfolio companies. You can imagine at the company level, what do we want to do in 5 years? What do we want to do in 1 year? What are we going to do this quarter? And then who is responsible? And then I make everyone do that, right? So if this is what we want to do as a company, then what are you going to do this quarter to contribute to those company goals? And then if everyone does that, and we look at this document every day, and then every week, and then every quarter, we're going to get somewhere, right? So I think the consistency point, every time I've been able to show up consistently for a thing, you can move it, right? And when I look back and I say, oh, I haven't made as much progress on that as I thought I would. It's like, oh, well, I wasn't being that consistent.
Right. Totally, like inside I'm like, yes, she gets me. The super type A part of me is literally doing cartwheels. And I'm like, see, my clients who coach with me and hear me talk about this process orientation to things, especially the goal setting at the beginning of the year, the plans throughout the year, quarterly down to weekly, which you then translate to daily. I mean, that's the formula, right? Like that, it's leveraging a tool and a system to apply for your own consistency. And when you landed with, if you do that, then you'll get somewhere. What I love is you will get somewhere. It's where you're intending to go, right? It's not like you're just going to end up. So it's actually the intention. And the other piece,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, sometimes you get to the end of a quarter and you're like, was that the right place to go? You know, like you have to course correct sometimes because you do get where you say you wanted to go, but maybe you can't have perfect vision. Like sometimes you set the wrong goal.
Or it evolves.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love that you started us off kind of on the personal, because I think sometimes we think there's process for personal, there's process and approach for professional, but we're one being, we are one human, right? Like you're just a human being. And so trying to separate sometimes creates this, it boils down sometimes to some inauthenticity, but the way you've applied it personally and professionally makes it very much Arlyn. And so I'm assuming you then get to show up as just you throughout both processes, because it's actually the same. It's just tailored depending on the circumstances that you're in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I started that kind of a process much earlier in my career than I did in my personal life. And I've only been doing it in my personal life, I'd say, since COVID, because I've never felt lost before, because work was always took up so much of my life. And I had that process around work. And then I took some time off around COVID, and that's where I was like, wait, where am I going in my personal life? And that's really when I felt the need to bring in that kind of a structure. I always resisted it in my personal life because I sort of thought that the structure was a lack of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Until I realized that like the structure is the freedom.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to kind of what you said, you know, it's this discipline that then gives the freedom that comes out of it, which is really empowering, because you're not at the affect of things if you have the discipline in the process. And I love that I'm not hearing you say control. It's just discipline, which is, it sounds as your intention throughout it.
I think the reason it feels less, I think the reason I like it is because it does make me feel more in control.
Yeah.
And at least more, because I know control can have a negative connotation too. Because I mean, the irony is none of us are ever really in control. Yeah. But when I don't know, you feel more directed, self-directed.
Yes. Yeah. Which I get that. Absolutely get that. I also appreciate the fact that you called out COVID led to a shift for you, which I think all of us in some form or fashion had that experience. What would you say has been the biggest thing for you just in your own evolution, given this, what I've been calling prolonged adult timeout that we've been in?
Well, of all of my friends, I think my life changed almost the most during COVID, because I went from living in New York City, where I lived since college, and always having work be like so much at the forefront of what I did. To moving out to Connecticut for a relationship, moving in with 2 children. So basically having a 7 and a 9-year-old overnight.
Oh my God.
And a lot of the things that new parents get to experience, and they, grow up with their new children. I was like sort of forced into that.
Yeah.
And so, all of a sudden I had these other priorities that weren't work. And I still love what I do. I still love working, but I had to figure out a way to make it fit my new life. And that's when I, started conceptualizing, this fractional idea. It was very much an idea then. And I think the fact the world changed made companies more open to working with, people in a fractional type of a way. And so that really opened the door for me to really shift what my career or what my job is, and how I think about my career.
Yeah. And I just realized something, just to make sure we're all on the same page and understanding, when you say fractional role, fractional leadership, what is your definition of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It means that I'm playing a role at multiple companies at the same time and bringing in both process and subject matter expertise to bring the best of what I can bring to a company, but to scale that across multiple companies. So when I was at Walmart, I started as the president of one of the brands, as Allswell, right? Yeah. And Allswell was successful. And my boss at the time, she had to go on maternity leave. And so they said, can you basically do what you're doing for Allswell, but also be the group president of this whole group, and also lead these other 4 brands. And so I had to think, well, how can I scale myself? How can I scale what I'm best at and what I bring to the best of what I bring to Allswell across this whole portfolio of brands? And that's, so I developed like an operating system for how to do that, right? It's a meeting cadence. It's a way of organizing myself. It's my own methodology. It's a process, right? Yeah. And part of it is that goal setting framework that we talked about before. There's other elements of that operating system as well. And so got pretty good at that at Walmart. And so really what I'm doing now with Little Fish is applying that same methodology and operating system. Just finding brands myself that I want to, and companies that I want to work with, and partnering with them in that way.
I mean, it just sounds so, it's like you've created the life that you want to live. It sounds so masterfully self-empowering. It's what comes to mind when I hear you talk about it.
Thank you. Well, I think I'm 80% of the way there, or maybe 75% of the way there. I haven't figured out how to take a vacation yet. I haven't, but it's new. I just started this, in the fall. So every month I get better at it, and that's part, empowering too. On the days where I have, back to backs, thank you for doing this on a Sunday. Like my weeks are just so crazy. I'm like,
thank you for doing this on a Sunday.
I'm like, you know what? Next month I know I'm gonna be better at this next month than I was last month. So, and it is very liberating in a way, to be your own boss. It's not that I don't like working for other people. I now work for lots of other people, but to be able to set the parameters of that is really nice.
I love that. So for someone listening and, they're hearing and they know more about me and they're like, I'm sure Farah's diving out to this. This sounds like an Excel spreadsheet on just steroids. But I would love it. I'm in my version of the spreadsheet is now Asana. I just love how you do use Asana. See, we're literally the same person and I love it. So, someone else might be listening to this and they might be thinking, I'm not that person. And, this can actually be hard. regardless of the system, what would your advice be to anyone who is trying to apply masterful execution to their life in whatever form it takes for them?
Yeah, I mean, some of my friends tell me when I tell them that I do this, they're like, that doesn't seem like you. You said, we see I'm not type A. I'm really not. And I'm not a spreadsheet kind of person. In fact, like I'm more manifester than goal setter, if that makes sense. Like I'm more.
I love it.
And I told you, I resisted it for a long time. So I think like if you think you're not the kind of person that would do it, question that and just try doing it and see how it feels to do it. You might surprise yourself. I didn't expect many of the benefits that I got from doing it.
So, I have to ask, when you think of the difference between manifester versus goal setter, what does that mean for you and how have you practiced that distinction?
Well, I start, for most of my adult life, I've like made vision boards, in Pinterest, I think of an idea and I find a picture that like resonates, a vision, at least for me, that works the best as a visual, something that resonates and makes, like sometimes I don't even know why I want it, but I'm like connected to it or I'm drawn to it. And I put it on my vision board. And I just try to look at that as often as possible. And I try to like do it for every area of life, not just like career, but when I think about like what kind of clothes I want to wear, or I don't know, even silly, stupid things. And it's not regimented as the goal setting part, right? You're not thinking about the how. You really, when you're manifesting, you suspend the how, and you just connect to the emotion of having that thing, right? Like a lot of times what you see in a picture is a feeling or a perceived feeling. And that's really what manifesting is about. It's not thinking about the how, it's thinking about the feeling and connecting to that feeling and being really agnostic to how that feeling gets to you, right? It sometimes can come through physical means, or it can come through a totally different physical manifestation than you ever thought it could, right?
Yeah.
Whereas goal setting is much more, I guess if manifesting is right brain, goal setting is much more left brain. It's much more planning. It's much more thinking. It's very how oriented.
Yeah.
So
yes.
I think that like if there's something I think the ideal practice is to do both, right? To start with the feeling, to start with the manifesting, and then connect it with the how.
Yeah.
For a while, like I was getting so into the goal setting stuff, I wasn't really doing the manifesting stuff. And then when I was getting to the goal setting thing, I got to a place, at least in some areas, not every area, I was like, I'm not dreaming. I don't have big enough. I kind of got where I thought I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I need to dream bigger. I need to go back to this vision, vision board and dream a bit bigger.
I appreciate that interpretation so much. Because as someone who actually does both, I don't think I've ever actually been able to articulate how both play a role in my life, especially for me, connecting manifestation to also faith. Because your point about the how doesn't matter, you just believe and take that belief to facilitate it becoming and being, versus the goal setting that is very much the formulaic how to execution. And your point that both play a part, for me, resonates a great deal. Even last season, Pamela Matson was a guest on the podcast, and we got into some of this as well. But hearing your distinction pointing to the how on both.
So I if you have a minute, I'll tell you a story. It's probably a 3-minute story about this.
I have all the minutes you'll give me. Okay. I have all the minutes you'll give me.
Okay. So I started my first company, PayPerks. I ran it for 8 years. We raised some money. We had a lot of success in the social impact world, but from a financial perspective, we weren't reaching the kind of goals that I had set out for the company to achieve. And I was working with a manifesting coach at that time, who I met through a meditation studio. So she was very right brain, soft kind of thing. And I was like, I've been working at this and I'm not achieving this particular goal. And what she said is, I think that you're manifesting on the wrong thing. And she's like, what have you been manifesting? And I'm like, that this company is a financial success for the shareholders and for the employees. And she said, well, why? Why do you care about that? And I went to more like a heart place than a head place, because I want them to feel good. I want them to feel like everything is good. You know, I want them to feel happy. I want them to feel, it was all about like feelings. And so she gave me a new mantra, like a new thing to focus on. She said, I think you're just focused on the wrong thing. And 2 years, then I sort of lost touch with her. I left PayPerks, I joined Walmart.
Yeah.
And 2 years into Walmart, I remember I was starting a home brand there. And I named the brand, and I'll remind you what the name of the brand is in a second. But 2 years after starting, I was reconnecting with this coach, and I looked back at my notes from the time we met, which was 2 years earlier. And the thing she told me to manifest was all is well. All is well. Wow. The name of the brand I started was Allswell. I didn't make that connection at the time, but I named the brand based on, and Allswell became, you know, a pretty big success for me and for, you know, the company. And so I manifested this idea of everyone, you know, being well in a very different way than I was trying to, you know, manifest it at the time. So if I'd been connected to the how or focused on the how, I never would have left the company, right? So I think that I just like love that story, because it really illustrates that, like, you don't even know the way in which you're manifesting the how. You don't even know the way in which you're manifesting the thing that you want. But focusing on the right thing and something that has like good externalities for the universe, that's not just like for yourself, but you want other people to feel this way. You know, it's a really powerful kind of thing.
Thank you for sharing your own epiphany. Like, that's from your own journey, and then being able to connect the dots. Thank you for sharing that. That's huge.
You're welcome.
And just to make sure I fully understand, you named it All's Well, but you hadn't thought back to that conversation with her. It just
it was like truly, a year and a half post that conversation with her, but it had so permeated my psyche that it was just like what I was thinking about. And I think that is the way that manifestation works, right? Is like when you're not actually thinking about it, you're still thinking about it, and it orients you in like very micro ways at every second of every day, so that when you get the thing, you're like surprised that you got the thing.
Yeah.
But really, you've been working towards it the whole time.
I mean, that's a whole that's an entire other okay. Yeah, that's a whole other episode, which I am sneakily confirming you will come back.
We can do a whole episode on things I manifested in very strange ways.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge lesson for us all too, from your own lesson. So again, thank you for sharing that, and we will do that episode at some point in the future. And with that lesson that you had, I now have to ask you, if you think back to the 21-year-old version of Arlyn, and she's whatever she's doing, wherever she is, and this insight, this wisdom, this the experiences that you've had as a human being in all of your facets, what is it that you want her to know, or what insight, wisdom do you actually want to make sure she has at that stage, if you could relay it to her?
I think it has to do with this all is well concept, and just not worrying so much, because like the things you want in life, if you put effort towards them, you will have them. Like, I really believe that. As long as, like, I mean, listen, if you want like super selfish things that are materialistic, and that's a different issue. But if you want if you want things for good reason, and good reason, like unselfish reasons, you know, then if you're consistent and you work towards them, whether it be the goal setting way or the manifesting way, you will have all of those things. You can't control the timeline, but you have those things. And so don't ever feel stressed. Just feel patient and know that it will all will be well.
It's amazing. Amazing. So in this commitment to all being well and thinking about how you hold yourself accountable to your own mode of operating as Arlyn in all of your facets again, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, or excuse me, to hold yourself accountable to that, especially as you describe yourself, what would that word be, especially if you had to complete the phrase living fabulously what as Arlyn?
Living fabulously uniquely, Arlyn, uniquely, right? I really believe that people who create their own unique lives are the happiest, or who live non-traditional lives are the happiest, because they're creating their own rules as they do it. And really, I'm pushing myself every day I think I'm happiest when I'm doing what I want to do, not like what society wants me to do or what, other people would want me to do. So living fabulously, uniquely, Arlyn.
I love that. If our guests wanted to, or our listeners, I mean, guests, but listeners wanted to find you, wanted to learn more about you just generally, or kind of your path and things that you're working on, where could they find you and any information on what you're working on?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, both under my name. And some of my projects are, if you check out marketerpicks.com, I'm working on an experiment with that. And I think aside from that, LinkedIn and Instagram are probably the best spots.
Okay, awesome. I have to say you are phenomenally uniquely Arlyn, and I'm so grateful for our connection and you jumping into this podcast with us, especially as I just randomly emailed you and you didn't hesitate to say sure, and then giving us your insight, your experience, and some of the wisdom that you've gained throughout your amazing journey. So thank you so much for that, Arlyn. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Of course. And listeners, viewers, we will wrap up today, and just wishing you a fabulous week ahead and hoping that you continue to stay fierce. Bye, everyone.